Welcome to the Darkstream, Vox Day, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. This is going to be a fairly controversial one, I suspect, at least for some folks. But I think that it's likely to be a interesting and educational one. So I'm going to be interested to see what kind of comments we have and what kind of questions we end up with over the next couple days. But so while we're waiting for some folks to get in here, I will point out a couple minor things. Number one, the Promethean and the Lawdog files are going to be going out very soon to subscribers. Number two, the next books are not going to be shipped until mid-October at the soonest, just because Italy is shut down and no leather is being produced for the entire month of August. So that's fun. But we'll be working hard, and we'll hopefully be able to deliver somewhere between 2 and 4 books before the end of the year. Also, if you haven't signed up yet for the Arkhaven announcements on Telegram, the link is on the blog. And finally, if you haven't listened to the new Baby Metal yet, I highly recommend Monochrome and The Legend. So these are songs that are right up there with No Rainbow and Karate and Onodari Daisukan. Highly recommend it. But now let's get to the meat of it. And Q is vastly disappointing and annoying and upsetting subject for a lot of people. For a lot of people that are on the side of the good, the beautiful, and the true. And it's understandable. We have our first super chat here, a generous one from Q1882. Funds for tub-sized glue. We'll get some glue and put some books together with that. Swedish Trash Panda says, in my opinion, Q is always a psyop to trick right-wingers into doing fuck all while trusting the plan and allowing lefties to do whatever without disturbance. No offense, Swedish Trash Panda, but that's a retarded take. And here's why. It's a retarded take for the same reason that every single "it's a distraction" is total nonsense. You don't need to trick right-wingers into doing nothing. Conservatives, by their very nature, do nothing. Giuseppe says, Q cringe op. Not surprised by that. But again, what's the best way that I can put this in a reasonably politic terms? The vast majority of people, even good people, reasonably smart people who follow the blog and are well-read, really have no capacity for understanding what the theoretical Q concept involves. Okay? And, it's, I realize that sounds very elitist. I realize that sounds very dismissive. The problem is that it's fundamentally true. Okay? If there's one thing that we've learned over the last 30, 40 years, it's that the world isn't what you're told it is. The world isn't what you're taught it is. I'm not at Owen Benjamin's level of insisting that absolutely everything is fake and gay. I'm not at the Miles Mathis level of insisting that everyone except thee and me are Jewish, and I'm not too sure about thee. And also, uh, everything's also about the money, etc., etc. Um, there's I'm also the secret king who has reinvented relativity, Newtonian physics, etc., etc. I mean, but the thing that's important to always keep in mind is that just because somebody talks nonsense doesn't mean that they are necessarily incorrect about factual statements they are making. This was the thing that was really tough for me to understand when dealing, especially with some intelligent women of my acquaintance. They would tell me, this is X, and I would say, well, why is it X? And then they would produce some absolute nonsense, factually incorrect, logically incorrect nonsense to try to explain or justify what they had said. And it took me maybe 5 to 10 years to realize that when you're dealing with an intuitive person, they don't know why they know what they know. They just know it. And if they're sufficiently intuitive, they happen to be correct. And so if you're not, just because you're a lunatic about dinosaurs, or just because you are a nutcase about pi being 7, or just because you believe in evolutionary astrology, which is a phrase that was new to me that made me laugh, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have any one given fact wrong. Now I've never been the nukes don't exist sort of person. I mean, I've always been very skeptical about Israel's so-called Samson option. I couldn't see how that would make any difference to a continental power like the USA or China or Russia. And also, I was kind of wondering about how do these things work if they never test them or change out the parts. I mean, for crying out loud, you don't start your car for 6 months, it stops working. When they take tanks and jets or ships out of mothballs, it takes all kinds of time to get them functioning again. So how is it possible that these missiles are ready to go in an instant? And then also, some of the stuff that we can observe over time. The fact that Hiroshima and Nagasaki don't seem to have any permanent radiation damage. Places that were supposed to be dead for 10,000 years are doing fine. Maybe the half-life thing is wrong, right? Doesn't mean they don't exist, but but now when you look at things like Miles Mathis wrote about the Oppenheimer movie, and he has some credibility with me because, unlike most people, I've actually read some of what Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote. It's nonsense. It's total bullshit. It's just like Jordan Peterson. All these people thought Jordan Peterson was really clever until someone like me came along, actually read it, and then pointed out This is not clever. This is a lunatic lusting after his cousin when he's not having sex dreams about his grandmother. You know, Wittgenstein is just Peterson on steroids. And so when you see characters like Oppenheimer, you know, and I knew nothing about Oppenheimer. I knew a bit about Feynman. I read both of his books, and you know, Feynman's an interesting character. All I knew about Oppenheimer was that he had that, you know, pretentious quote about "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds. Aren't I deep and intellectual and troubled?" You know, that always. I mean, yes, it was a great quote, but it was a little too perfect. You know, it was obviously a line that I'd always assumed it was a line that he'd practiced. You know, something came up with and thought, oh, this will sound really cool. This will sound really great. Now, with what I've read about Oppenheimer, or as Powers That Bear coined, Cy Oppenheimer, it's obvious that the guy was a fraud. You know, there is no way the Manhattan Project was real. And you don't need to delve into any conspiracy theory. Just do what I'd never done, but do what Miles Mathis did. Just read the Wikipedia entry about it. All you got to do is read the Wikipedia entry about it, and you will find yourself going, bullshit. That, you know, I mean, of all the things that never happened, what never happened the most was clearly the 1,600 pounds or tons or whatever it was of 65% pure grade uranium that had been stored in New York City by a Belgian company that had been defunct for 6 years. Not a chance. There's no way that happened. And there's no way that the U.S. military decided to put, you know, the Los Alamos Weapons Development Center on Oppenheimer's ranch. I mean, what is that? You know, and then on top of that, the fact that there's this like total mediocrity who's in charge of the military part of it. You know, I mean, there's you just can't take it seriously once you see past it. You can't take it seriously. So my point in talking about this stuff and leading up to the return of Q to the conversation is there's a lot of stuff going on that doesn't make sense. There's a lot of stuff going on that contradicts what we believe to be true. Stuff that we were taught. Whether it's rockets, whether it's dinosaurs. You know, I haven't paid any attention to that stuff. I don't have an opinion on it. Flat Earth, don't have an opinion on it. Evolution by natural selection, I've looked into that. It's totally false. Totally impossible. Free trade, I've looked into that. Totally false. Totally impossible. All generated, you know, in that 150-year Enlightenment window. And we don't even need to get into, you know, modern art or any of that kind of stuff. But so anyhow, let's now what we're going to watch a bit of. Well, we won't watch the whole thing, but we're going to watch enough of this, and I'm going to point out the two interesting aspects of this, and then we'll discuss the possibility that the whole Q thing has been fundamentally substantive, fundamentally legitimate, despite the fact that to any normal, rational observer, it looks like a complete failure to the point that it can't possibly be anything but, you know, hopium. So this is a video, and most of, you know, a lot of you will probably have already seen it by now, but this is a video that Donald Trump himself told us that we should all watch. So regardless of what you think of some of his failures, let's keep in mind this is the guy who was the greatest president of the United States since Andrew Jackson. And listen to what this recommended video has to say. So I'm going to turn this on, pop on my headphones, and let's check it out.
In the studio, good to see you as always.
Good to see you.
There's so many people putting this down as a political conspiracy theory, but actually there are real questions to be answered here.
There are?
Yeah, of course there are. Of course there are.
What he's being accused of, but what part do you think is to answer that the 2020 election is going to be re-litigated because of this? They've made a huge, huge mistake with this one, because even though we thought what was going to happen was they were going to go after him for treason or sedition, but they did criminally charge him, but they didn't go to that extreme. As a result, he has due process, so he can subpoena people and bring things in. Now, let me say something about this 2020 election, is that Biden is the legitimate president, but he's the legitimate president of what is now the bank.
Okay, this is key. She says, Biden is the legitimate president, but he's the legitimate president. I actually jumped in a little bit too soon. He's the legitimate president of the corporation of the United States, not the actual United States of America. Now, this is real. This is not fiction. This is not a joke. This is not copium. There's absolutely no question that there is a United States corporation that was set up and taken over, back in the early 20th century. It might have even been set up a little bit before then, but it was essentially taken over in 1913. Now, this is something that anyone who studies enough history knows about. And this is why I was saying a lot of the things that most people are not aware of this. Most people have not spent any time looking into the history of these things. Coffee Grounds Bear obviously has, because he says the United States spelled in all capital letters. That's precise. That's exactly right. It's why, what you may not realize is that each person is a corporation. The corporation is set up, it's tied to, I don't know, some sort of international registry and all this sort of thing. I'm familiar with this stuff because this is stuff that was utilized by all of the anti-tax people, right? My dad was involved in all of this. He knew all of this stuff. Thanks for the super chat, Kolahoy Bear. He says a small token of appreciation for your work, Vox. Thank you, very generous. It's like this. There's a sovereign citizen aspect. There's a lot of different aspects. I don't get into any of that stuff, and I've always avoided that stuff for one very important reason. The people that get into this, like my father, tended to get into a lot of trouble because they failed to understand one important thing. The bad guys don't follow the rules. They break the rules. Yes, they come up with legal structures and ways to technically make it look like they could be obeying it in this twisted way, but then they break it anyhow. I know this for an absolute fact. I've personally witnessed it. I know other people have personally witnessed it. So that this innocent notion, this naive notion that there's this magical layer of reality that everybody, including the bad guys, obey is not true. There is multiple layers of these illegal structures. I mean, that's not a mystery. There's county laws, there's town laws, there's state laws, there's federal laws. So the idea that there's another layer or two that isn't really hidden, it's just not talked about much. That's not the big game changer that all these poor anti-tax advocates believe that it is. You can go ahead and stand on your, District 66 court, or I'm just making stuff up here. Don't take it seriously, please. You can rely on all that. It's not going to do you any good, because at the end of the day, they don't care what the black letter law is. But anyhow, let's listen to more, and you'll see more what we're talking about here.
Corrupt U.S. corporation. And that was a treaty in 1871. Well, on September 12, 2018, Trump created an executive order. Within that, he outlined in future elections any kind of foreign or domestic interference, specifically for the 2020 election. So we say, how did he know some of these things were going to happen? Election integrity on both sides of the aisle is tough. It's really tough. But what this has done is it's opened the door for Trump to present his case.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? Because what we see on this side of the pond is a very difficult situation where the legal system is politicised in the United States, which is abhorrent to us over here. So the fact that Trump can subpoena, some people saying it's a mistake by Jack Smith, but actually he can subpoena, people can actually see evidence from both sides. That's a sensible move. Exactly.
And it's a great mistake by Jack Smith that he's done that. Absolutely great. See, the thing is, think about Edward Snowden and all the information he had. Think about the fact that our military, our Department of Defense Space Force, if you think that they don't have the actual real results from the election, then you're fooling yourself.
Yeah, but what we do know with this is we're told that there are plenty of notes from people, including Vice President Pence, that there are some recordings of Donald Trump acknowledging that actually what he said in public was nonsense. That some of these states, whether he claimed he was out saying look, Detroit, it's corrupt, it's all corrupt, the results are corrupt. And that when in reality he knew it wasn't. That's illegal.
But you know what? That's what someone's claiming, but that's not the fact, and that's not what Donald Trump really has ever said. He's been very, very clear. I mean, the issues were, for example, in Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania stepped in and changed some of the election laws. Under our Constitution, it's only the state legislators that can do that. 2,000 Mules, the film that came out, what they did, they spent over $4 million tracking the phones. And the reason it's only 2,000 mules is that based on the visits to the drop boxes in Georgia, they had to have gone over 10 times. And they've got all the film for that. So the thing is that the election integrity is so different and so problematic in every single state. But that doesn't mean that the machines didn't do something, that there were some other kind of finagling. But the long and short... Go ahead.
Well, it doesn't... But that's where conspiracy comes in, is it? To say, well, it doesn't mean that something didn't happen. Well, there's no evidence that it happened. I mean, there's how many court cases did the Trump campaign try to bring? Nothing's gone in his favour.
Okay, wait a minute. Everyone, the media goes, oh, there were 60 court cases that were rejected. No, there were 3. He won 2, he lost 1, 57 were never heard because they had no standing. And standing means that the person bringing the case has to claim some kind of impact or injury. So
that's the other one. That's the second of the three big important points that I wanted to note. So a lot of people are rightly frustrated because of all the legal shenanigans that have taken place and the general ineptitude of the various people that have come forward to do this, right? And so when you look at look at what's actually happened, Trump hasn't been losing any of these cases. As she said, he's won 2, he's lost 1. The other 57 were never heard. And, you know, we've seen this kind of stuff. We've seen some of these kind of shenanigans in our own experiences with Patreon and with Indiegogo and so forth. We've seen the fact that these judges / arbitrators, they just make stuff up, and they'll do it whenever they think they can get away with it. But and so the fact that the media has run with this narrative, and most of the people, even on our side, believe this false narrative, that the whole issue has been litigated and found false. It's absolutely not true. Now, I will say one of the frustrating things about pretty much everybody that Trump puts forward is that they all seem to have real difficulties communicating what they're trying to say. You know, this lady could have laid out her case much more specifically, in a much simpler manner, easy to follow, and more importantly, stop taking the specific bait and going off into these parentheticals, which then makes it hard to understand what the whole point is, right? All she said so far that's significant is, number one, Biden is the president of the U.S. corporation, and he is not the president of the United States, the actual country. So first of all, she said something that is at least reflective of the truth. I mean, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I don't know whether Biden actually is the president of that corporation. You know, I'm not on the board. Nobody sends me the meeting. Nobody sends me the minutes of the meetings. The point is that her comment, her statement, is actually is consistent with what we know to be the truth, right? And so, I mean, Hawk is correct. They're being very, very careful not to put a single word out of place. But again, you can't allow someone interviewing you to bring up a specific and then go and talk about the specific, allowing yourself to be pulled off on a parenthetical, because it tends to confuse the message for people that don't understand what's really being talked about. I mean, of all of you that have seen this video before, how many of you grasped what the 3 important points were? First important point, the distinction between the corporation and the nation, the constitutional nation. That was absolutely massive, because it's not something that any mainstream narrative has ever discussed. This is the first time, because Trump told everybody to watch this video, this is the first time that it is entering the mainstream awareness. Secondly, what she just said there is also very important, because she was saying that the whole notion that the issues relating to the legitimacy of the of the election has been litigated is not true. It's absolutely not true. We'll get to that, Coffee Grounds Bear. Just be patient. This video is very recent, a couple days ago. Now let's continue. There's one more point that I want. We're not going to watch the whole thing, but there's one more point that I want you guys to see.
Oh, it's really, the media did that, and they're great at doing that, but it was a fallacy in there. And the thing is that, I sit on a task force at the Department of Defense, and the thing is, they've got the goods. They've got the goods, and Trump knew that if he presented any of the goods early on, we'd have a civil war. That he really felt that the people needed to see how bad it could get.
And that's the sense that we're getting from Trump's lawyer about what his...
That was the last point, and that's pretty much the end of the significant part of the interview. A lot of us have been asking, why didn't Trump cross the Rubicon? There is absolutely no doubt, zero doubt, that the election results were completely fake. Okay? There's no doubt whatsoever. Being from Minnesota and knowing the enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton and for Obama, the idea that Joe Biden got more votes than Hillary or Obama either time is totally impossible. You don't even have to bring Donald Trump's votes into it. And Minnesota is the most liberal left country or state in the entire union. Back when Reagan nearly swept the entire nation, Minnesota voted Democrat. They're so far left, they don't even have a state Democratic Party. The state Democratic Party is an alliance between the Democratic, the Farmer, and the Labor Party. That's why it's called the DFL. So, now let's get into that point. She said he didn't do it. He didn't cross the Rubicon. He didn't expose the falsehood because it would cause a civil war. And I think a lot of people misunderstand what that point is. The idea, people take that, they take that statement at face value, saying that, he doesn't want to risk a civil war. I don't think that's correct. I think he doesn't want to risk a civil war. He's not highly certain that he's going to win. Okay? Now, excuse me. Look at everything that has changed since 2020. The world has completely changed. We may not recognize the extent of the change. We may not recognize the amount that it has changed. But, what's happened in Ukraine has completely upended the balance of power. The U.S. is no longer the dominant military force in the world. That coup in Niger does not happen, and the countries of Mali and Burkina Faso do not come to the new government's support if the U.S. isn't embarrassed in Afghanistan and Ukraine, if their weakness isn't revealed. Just yesterday, the Russian and Chinese navies sailed past Alaska. They're doing the same type of stuff. They're sending out a clear signal to the entire world. Hey, guess what? the USA isn't in charge anymore. And so, that's just the stuff that we can see. Now, a lot of people, here's the one thing that's always bothered me about the people that talk about, what's it called? Operation, Swedish Trash Panda referred to it. It was like Operation Justice or Operation Trust. That's it. The problem I have with the people that say, "Oh, well, there never was a plan, and it was all an Operation Trust thing. It was all a distraction. It was all designed to keep people who were never going to do anything in the first place from doing anything." I mean, come on. That makes no sense. But the other thing to keep in mind is, number one, a plan doesn't always work. Number two, no one who is even remotely competent has just one plan. I'll give you a recent example. People say, "Oh, well, there was, Russia tried to take Kiev and at the start of the special missionary operation, and they failed, and so the whole war's over, and Russia can't win." I mean, how does that make any sense whatsoever? That's like saying, well, because the Germans successfully took France, Germany won World War II. I mean, the Russians actually came this close to taking Zelensky. They had control of the airport. They had the ability to, they tried a very quick decapitation strike. It didn't work. It didn't work. So does that mean that they called off the whole special military operation? No, of course not. They just switched to Plan B, which, by the way, was always not only on the table, it was always in operation. They already had all the troops positioned around the Crimea and across the Donbass, because they knew that there was no guarantee that the decapitation strike at Kiev was going to work. And like I said, it did come much, much closer to working than anybody ever imagined. Now, I assumed that all this stuff that Q was talking about had to be taking place before Biden took office, or took fake office, as is the case. Because remember, I'm aware that evil doesn't obey the rules. That's why, even though I was certain that the election results were faked, I was certain that Biden is a fake president, and I'm actually pretty confident that the guy playing the role of Biden is not Joe Biden. The earlobes don't lie. But, Jay Foot says, boomer grandmas were going to lead a revolution, but then Q stopped them from doing it. Yeah, that how probable does that sound? I mean, if you consider the fact that boomers were pretty, pro-Q in the same way that they're pro-Tea Party and all that sort of thing. They love their slogans and rallies. But what were they going to do? Nothing. Of course they weren't going to do anything. Right? So anyhow, are there any signs? Let's forget what that woman just said. Let's forget the fact that Trump specifically said, hey, pay attention to what this person's saying. Are there any signs that, let's call it the Q narrative, might actually be in play? And the answer is yes. There are so many anomalies that surround the fake Biden administration, it's not even funny. I'm not going to list them for you here, but I was suspicious. In fact, I strongly suspect that the I strongly suspect that the Obama administration was not legitimate either. Why? Because they always have these funny games with the oath. Oh, we have to re-administer it in secret because we didn't actually do it properly and all this sort of thing. It's total nonsense. And see, here we got some of the copers. Facelifts join the lobes to the cheek. You can see the scars where they join. No, they don't. Go look at Michelle Pfeiffer. Go look at every Hollywood actress that has ever had a facelift. Their earlobes haven't changed. And it's not just the earlobes. I mean, come on. The guy's nose is different. The guy's eyes are different. It's not the same frickin' person. I mean, the whole thing was orchestrated back in 2008. That was obvious too. First of all, Hillary should have easily won the nomination. She didn't win the nomination because, oh dear, her campaign manager didn't understand what the new rules were. What are the chances of that? Right? I mean, as soon as I read that, back in 2008, I was just like, wait, okay, why do they want this? Clearly they want this guy to be president. And then McCain is winning, thanks to Palin. And then McCain throws away his campaign because he stops campaigning in order to help the banks. I mean, there's no chance that all of his political advisors didn't realize that he was throwing the campaign in. I knew it at the time. You can read on the blog when that happened. I was like, what the hell's going on here? This guy is throwing the election. Right? And so what we see is that there's this, we saw it in Russia, where Putin got in and managed to make a lot of changes and deals and that sort of thing, most of which was behind the scenes. Putin, to this day, is regarded as a traitor to by the globalists because they thought he was one of them. She was only allowed, his whole family was on the outs. She was allowed back in, but he was considered to be kind of a non-entity that they didn't really like that he was so anti-corruption, but, and somehow he ends up in charge. It's really remarkable to see how much the world has changed since 2015. And I don't think we're done with the changes yet. I'm absolutely not saying, oh, trust the plan, it's all a done deal. Trump is going to come back and win the election in 2024 and he's going to restore everything and he's actually going to appoint decent people this time instead of these. But here's the thing. Trump's appointments were so reliably bad They turned out so reliably awful that you almost have to be suspicious of it being purposeful. I mean, that's at least a possibility. You know, I'm just to be clear, I'm dubious too. I mean, I'm skeptical too. People are like, oh, you know, Vox is a total Q-tard, blah, blah, blah. You cannot find anywhere on my blog, you know, just trust the plan. Paradise on earth is assured. BFM Bear said, did he have Jim Cramer do his appointment list? Here's the thing. Trump's appointments were so bad that about the only thing that he could have done to convince me that all of them were being made intentionally bad is he didn't appoint Jim Cramer to be in charge of the Treasury. If he had appointed either Jim Cramer or Paul Krugman to be in charge of the Treasury, I would have been 100% certain that the whole thing was a setup and under control. They weren't quite that bad. You know, I'm not, some of you guys are saying you've done it, Vox. I'm once again Q-tard. That's not the point. That's not the point. You know, there are certain things that you can say are certain. And there are certain things that you can't. For example, I said that I was of the opinion, and I am still of the opinion, that Russia could have taken Kiev in a week. I mean, they came this close in the first 3 days. And they did it with an airborne force. I think it's not Simplicius, but I don't remember his name, like Reminiscence of Things Past or whatever it is. He points out that this was the most successful, the attack on Kiev was the most successful mass airborne operation in history. More successful than the German airborne attack on Crete, more successful than the 101st Airborne at Normandy, and so forth. And so, you know, had Russia wanted to declare proper war, been dropping its hypersonics on Kiev and so forth, they probably could have taken it properly within a week. Could have, but they didn't. Hawk says, Andrei Martyanov. Yeah, he's really good. I like his stuff. So the point is that just because they don't do what you think they should do, and just because they fail at doing something that you think they theoretically might have been able to do, does not mean that it's all over. You know, you can't make the only correct opinion you should have about Q and that sort of thing is insufficient. We have insufficient information to make any conclusive statement about it. That's one of the reasons why I've basically kept my mouth shut about it. I even had people some time ago demanding, you know, if you want to maintain your credibility, you need to apologize for being wrong about Q. I said, how can you say that I'm wrong about Q? We don't know yet. It's too soon to tell. Now, you know, I'm not going to, if I wanted to, you know, I could feign philosophical depth, and in much the same way that Deng Xiaoping, who he wasn't misquoted, but he was misunderstood. He was asked what his opinion of the French Revolution was. And this isn't like in the, I don't know, 70s or 80s. They asked him, well, what's your opinion of the French Revolution? He said, well, it's too soon to tell. And this was considered very deep and Chinese and philosophical because, of course, if it's too soon to tell the consequences of something that happened in 1789, that's not the point. The point is it is still too soon to tell whether the Q narrative is substantially correct or not, because there are still many signs that the forces around Trump are working on the process of overturning the fake results of the fake 2020 election. And yes, Lord knows there's a lot of nonsense. I mean, why is Rudolph Giuliani involved in any way, shape, or form? I mean, it's almost laughable. And yet, despite the fact that it's laughable and ridiculous, they're still sending in young women with large breasts to distract him and take him out. Right? I mean, yeah, there's a lot of, but here's the thing. What we're dealing with is a war. It's a hidden war. It's a secret war. There's a lot of stuff going on that we don't know about. There's a lot of stuff going on that we don't understand. So, assuming that things are over at this point in time isn't possible. If Trump gets arrested and goes to jail and dies in jail, and Biden goes on to win re-election and things just continue along that way, yeah, I think there is going to come a time when we can say this whatever they tried, they failed. But it's too soon. Look at how long the special military operation has gone on. Look how long Xi's war on corruption has gone. There's a really funny quote. I'll show the video sometime. I downloaded it. But there's a video of all these empty mansions in China that were built in 2010. And the reporter asks, so where are the people that were supposed to live here? And the farmer says, Xi arrested all of them. So, yeah, and Raging Zoomer says, Trump getting arrested is probably the greatest Q proof of them all. Certainly not a black pill, something must be happening. Well, that's what the woman is talking about specifically. I don't know if you understood that or not. She was saying that the prosecutor made a mistake because the first two arrests, they basically, I don't know if they didn't follow through on the full indictment or what. Because frankly, I mean, this is how little attention I pay to this. For somebody who's supposedly a big Q-tard, this is how little attention I pay to it. I don't even know what happened with the first two arrests. I figure it's going to sort itself out. The stuff I'm paying attention to is what's going on with Kiev. I'm paying what's going on in Taiwan, and I'm paying attention to what's going on in the Middle East, and now Africa. I mean, I knew there was going to be a second front. I did not expect the second front to be in Niger at all. But that's the point. If even people who are experts in the subject, who are paying attention to all this stuff, can't even get where the next front is correct, what are the chances that we have any idea of what's going on behind the scenes with relation to the 2020 election? Giuseppe says Africa is hype. I totally disagree. You're being too tactical. You're showing your lack of strategy again, Giuseppe. What's happening there is that they're stretching out the already stretched out resources, military resources of the USA and the Europeans. It's not an accident that there's already US forces and French forces there. They have to be there because the French need their uranium. Which is related, of course, to the whole Ukrainian thing, because they need the uranium desperately because they're not importing the Russian natural gas. And so what I think is happening is the onset of a war by 1,000 cuts. I now expect that instead of something big happening with Taiwan, I thought that the second front was going to be something in the Middle East, because there is some minor, it's been heating up around Israel a bit, but not enough that I was certain of it. But I sort of expected that there'd be something happening there to force the U.S. to deal with that front. North Korea was the other good option. But Africa's even better, because with Africa they can just send Wagner. Wagner is more than capable of dealing with pretty much anything in Africa. The Russians don't have to even get their hands dirty in order to force the U.S. to commit more forces there, and so forth. I've been telling you for over a year that World War III has begun. This is World War III. We're living in it. What I think is going to be a little bit different is that I think that there's going to be much more serious consequences for the United States. The United States is not going to come out of this having bombed every other industrial economy into oblivion and able to benefit by selling them the materials to rebuild their production facilities for the next 10 years. So Exterminator Bear says, Vox, do the financial elite ruling class actually get arrested, or is it theater? It's not theater, but you can't talk about the financial elite. They're factions. No revolution is ever successful without having a faction in the ruling elite. The American revolutionaries were not a bunch of poor frontiersmen. They were very wealthy, very aristocratic, elite British citizens living in the American colonies. And so, there's going to be, just like Putin, just like Xi, there's going to be people that are allied with Trump who are going to end up on top, that people that you and I are probably not entirely enthusiastic about. But they're going to have made the right choice at the right time, and presumably they're not going to be too steeped in the unspeakable evils that are, that make up the darker part of the ruling factions. Never ever give in to the temptation to try to reduce everything to a binary. If you do that, you will absolutely be completely wrong. You'll miss the point. You'll miss what's going on. You know. Ladumba says the Xi-Putin-Trump alliance is also a big Q thing. Well, I mean, maybe, but it's also a completely obvious thing. You know, the way that it looked to me, you know, except for all these anomalies that were surrounding the what do you call it? The inauguration. If it wasn't for all those inaugurational anomalies, you know, I would have just assumed, okay, Xi was successful, Putin was successful, Trump failed. But like I said, I'm not saying trust the plan. I'm not saying 2 more weeks. I'm saying unless and until Donald Trump dies without a clear and obvious successor who is continuing what he was doing and taking it further, it is too soon to conclude that the Q narrative is false. It's too soon to conclude that it's real, but it failed. Now, I understand where people like AC are coming, where they're saying, this story sucks. You know, but people like AC is a little bit more radical. You know, he wants to bring on the Civil War. You know, he's like, forget this stuff. Bring it on. Let's do this. And there are a lot of people who feel that way. Right? And it's understandable. But again, there's a lot of people who are really upset that Putin didn't launch a spring offensive of his own. You know, and the arguments are the same, but you know, people are dying. People on our side are dying. People on our side are suffering. That's true, but if you know, these are people who are playing for literally the highest of material stakes. It behooves them to be careful. It behooves them to take their time. It behooves them to make sure that they dot all their T's, or they dot all their I's and they cross all their T's in order to get everything straight, in order to make sure that they win. Are you guys seeing a lot of confidence out of the neocons? Do you guys hear a lot about how Goldman Sachs is doing great? I don't. I sense a lot of fear. I sense a desperation. I see statements being made like, if we lose Ukraine, we lose everything. So doesn't that justify keeping your mind a little bit open to maybe there's something going on behind the scenes that we only see these little glimmers of, we only see these little flashes of, that might be true. That video that we played tonight is real. Donald Trump pointed to it for a reason. Now, I don't understand why he embraced the vaccine. That's something that, you know, hopefully, if he openly becomes president again, hopefully it's something he'll address. It's damn sure something that he's going to have to face God about, right? Ladumba says, even Bill Gates said recently that people distrust vaccines more now after the pandemic than before. That's true. Well, yeah, and it's also just possible, like Swedish Trash Panda said, that he trusted the experts. You know, the guy's not a scientist or a doctor. You know, You never know. You just never know. But here's the thing, and this is the single most important thing. The Bible says faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. But hope is not just a virtue. Hope is one of the three central Christian virtues. So have hope. Don't be afraid of false hope. Have hope until the very end. I do. How does blackpilling and announcing that everything is done and Joe Biden is going to rule forever, and there's no point in that whatsoever. Idaho Crusader says, what are we hoping with regards to Q? That Trump will use his arrest to submit accurate information and put it on the public record that demonstrates the total falsity of the Biden election claims. If that happens, that's 100% proof that Q is real and that Q has been at least partially successful. We will see. We will see. But, have hope, have faith, pray for the man. Internet Predator says, the court will just LOL at it. It doesn't matter what that court does. The point is there is now a vehicle for putting that stuff on the public record. That's why the one was saying the guy made a mistake. Now, was it actually a mistake, or is he making the mistake on purpose? Who knows? Who knows? But anyhow, all I'm saying is keep an open mind. And it is too soon to have a conclusive opinion on the question of Q. By the way, speaking of Q, Alt Hero Q number 6 is just about done. So have a good evening. I'm Vox Day, and this is the Darkstream.